Hey y'all, welcome back to Right at the Wire. Well, we've talked about form, so now let's get to part two of our elements of handicapping for the Preakness. We're going to talk today about class, so let's get into it. So now we're going to talk about class, and that is an element that often is overlooked. A lot of times, we think because a horse is in a race that means that he belongs. Well, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So it's a really good thing to take a look at, particularly with a Triple Crown type of race, particularly with 3-year-olds, who are still growing, still learning. So when we evaluate class, these are the things we look at. We're going to look at pedigree, and I encourage you to take a look at our individual postings for the Derby contenders who are now running in the Preakness, as well as the new shooters, and you'll get a deeper dive into the pedigree for your reference. We're going to look at prior race form, just like we did with form, but more importantly, we're going to look at what type of race was it, the competition that they ran against, and we've graded all of those. And I think that gives us a better feel for the class of a horse coming into this race. And then finally, we'll subjectively look at progression, whether or not the horse is going to move forward or regress off of his last race. And certainly that's a really vital part of our analysis. And we did it, it goes more to form, but it's important for class as well. So we're going to use that same +2, -2 scale, and pretty much speaks for itself. Excellent would mean the horse belongs in the race and is one of the better contestants. Above average belongs in the race, but maybe not quite as good as the best. And then average, below average, and poor kind of speak for themselves. And really poor just means the horse simply doesn't belong. And then we'll use progression. We'll use that same +or -2 scale on whether or not we feel that they're going to move forward or regress or just stay the same and continue to run the way they have been. So we'll start with Mugatu, and we looked at his races in form, and again, on our individual postings, we do have replays for all of them, and we break them down from the visual standpoint, so I encourage you to take a look there. And you see, pedigree-wise, I think Mugatu is probably about average to be in this field. I think he can handle a distance. I'm not worried about that. The Bluegrass was certainly an above-average race, and I thought Mugatu ran a good race. It was a non-factoring 5th, but he did run pretty well, and he did have the type of scenario that would be conducive to him running a good race because he did have some pace to run to. The Rushaway, not a very good field, so it gets a -2. And Mugatu was kind of taken out of his element because he had to be a little more forwardly placed because of the lack of pace, and it really didn't respond to it, so he gets a -2. The Battaglia, we remember Encino kind of broke out, and that was a pretty good race, so it gets a +1, and I thought Mugatu ran pretty well in it, and he gets a +1. Now, progression-wise, he's getting a +1 because I do think Mugatu can run better in the Preakness. However, I think he's got some things working against him, namely the race shape, and also I'm not sure he's fast enough, so I do believe Mugatu is going to run a better race, but whether it's good enough remains to be seen. So overall, he gets a +2. So now we come to Uncle Heavy. We remember who won the Withers. And we take a look here, and you see his pedigree is kind of below average, I'd say. Social inclusion, I don't think much of as a sire. He's okay. But as far as stacking up with the others in here, no, I don't think it's as good. The Wood Memorial was an above-average race, and Uncle Heavy, he was stuck in the 13 hole. We can give him a little bit of an excuse there, but he's a late runner, and it doesn't really matter that much for them. I just thought he was flat, and he just ran kind of an okay race and nothing to write home about. The Withers, he did run an above-average race, but the field was not very good. And so it gets a -1 because it was a below-average class race. Progression-wise, Butch Reed usually gets them ready when he ships them, and I think Uncle Heavy will run better, and I think he could certainly back his way into maybe the bottom of the Super or even the Try. But again, the race shape I think works against him, and I think he's a little outclassed here, so he gets a +1, which is the lowest in the field. Catching Freedom ran, I thought, an excellent Kentucky Derby. We mentioned that prior. And we'll take a look here. He's got the pedigree, no question about it, for 2 turns. I thought he ran an excellent race in the Derby. Just wasn't quite good enough, but hey, he finished 4th out of 20, and he ran a very good race. He got a great ride from Flavien Prat, so he gets a +2. Louisiana Derby was an excellent race as well, and I thought he ran great in that one as well. And then progression-wise, not sure if he's going to keep his form or will build off of the Derby because of this is now 4th off the layoff or the beginning of a new form cycle, and that sometimes can mean a slight regression. Brad Cox certainly knows how to keep a horse in good form, and if he has the horse in the race, I'll presume that he's going to be fine. And he does stack up well class-wise. The smaller field should help him, and I do believe he's going to be more forwardly placed as he was in the Derby. He may be a little bit more in this race. Only question I have is we saw that progression with Angel of Empire last year, but the more forwardly placed he was, there did come a point where it started to take a little something away. So I do worry about that a little bit. So consequently, he gets a +1 instead of a +2. But overall, all kinds of positives with Catching Freedom, and he gets a +10. So now we come to Muth, the likely favorite and the horse to beat, in my opinion. You see that Arkansas Derby was an outstanding race. He's got the pedigree to run in this race. With Bob Baffert, I'm very certain this horse is going to run a big one. And so positives all the way around. He gets a +8. Mystic Dan is a big question mark to me. Now, I have not been the biggest fan of this horse really all the way along, and he did fool me in the Derby. I did think the inside post was a help for him because I was fairly certain they were going to try to save ground with him on the rail, and they did. It was a jockey's race. Brian Hernandez rode a fantastic race. Now, was Mystic Dan the best horse that day? No. Was Brian Hernandez the best jockey that day? Yes. And consequently, it was a +2 race, and he won it, so he gets a +2. Now, the Arkansas Derby was also an excellent race, but Mystic Dan had that same ground-saving trip, and he couldn't handle Muth, and he couldn't handle Just Steel. He ran what I consider to be an okay third, but nothing spectacular, so consequently, he gets a 0. Now, progression-wise, I am giving Mystic Dan a -1 because Kenny McPeak likes to point horses to races. And I have to believe he was pointing for the Kentucky Derby. Now, he was debating whether or not to put Mystic Dan in the Preakness, and I'm sure he got quite a bit of pressure to run him, being the Kentucky Derby winner. But it doesn't follow a pattern that Mystic Dan would run a consecutive good race, given the way Kenny McPeak points horses to races and the way he trains. Does it mean he doesn't know what he's doing? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying his pattern is to point horses to races, and this would be kind of a denouement after the climax. So for that, he gets a -1. I think he may run okay. If it rains, which there may be a possibility of it, certainly he gets upgraded if there's mud. However, I also want to point out, I think the rail was a little bit more to his advantage in the Southwest Stakes than it necessarily being muddy. So, all that said, you add them all up, he gets a +3. Seize the Gray, for the coach, who knows? I mean, honestly, it's just really hard to tell. Seize the Gray is by Arrogate. He's got the pedigree to be in this race, I think. His dam not quite as good, but he can belong, so he gets a +1. Pat Day Mile was not the greatest of fields, I didn't think, and it was a one-turn mile, but he won it, and he ran a very good race. Whether he can follow it up with a consecutive effort, that's the question. Take a look. The Jeff Ruby Stakes, I thought he ran a very good third. The Bluegrass Stakes, not so good. And that was a step up in class as well as being around 2 turns. So he's kind of got that Wayne Lucas good race, bad race type of pattern. Whether or not he can progress from that remains to be seen. This horse has had a lot of starts since he debuted this year, and we know the coach likes to run him. He could very well run a good race, but let's also remember, speed-wise, I'm not sure he stacks up with the best in this group. So he gets a -1 for a total of +2. And with the Wayne Lucas horses, they're always going to straddle 0 because of the good race, bad race type of situation. So that's the way Seize the Gray stacks up. So we look at Just Steel, the other entrant by the coach. And I've always liked this horse. I really do. I think he belongs in this race. I think Justify was a little bit of a stretch at 1.25 miles, I thought. But at 1 3/16, I think Just Steel can handle it. So he gets a +1. The Derby, he just didn't run a good race at all. I think he was a little too sharp, and they had him up amongst the leaders. I don't know if that was jockey error on Keith Asmussen's part, but it seemed seemed kind of a questionable decision to get up that early. It also may have been he thought he maybe didn't have a lot of horse and just sort of gunned it and see what they could do, and obviously it didn't work, so he gets a -2. Arkansas Derby ran an excellent race, his career best, but in keeping with that zigzag pattern that Just Steel has, the Derby, he obviously foundered. The Rebel Stakes, he was carried wide. It was more of a race you could make an excuse for because he was wide all the way around the track, and he pretty much didn't have much of a chance because of the outside post. But he didn't respond to it, so he gets a -2. Now, progression-wise, I'm giving him a 0 because in theory, if you look at his pattern, he should run a good race. But this horse has run a lot. And I really think this horse needs a break. But you never know with the coach. So I'm just going to leave it at 0. I could go +1. I could go -1. I could go +2. I could go -2. So I'm just going to leave it at 0. So he gets a total of +4. So now we come to Tusk and Gold, who we all really were impressed with in the Louisiana Derby. And coming in here, he has outstanding pedigree. That's not a problem. Louisiana Derby was a good race, and he had a good third. He didn't have an answer for Anna Marie or Catching Freedom, but he did re-engage in the stretch, and that's always a good thing to see. I have no doubt Chad Brown is going to have this horse ready to run a big one. He has done it before. He did it last year with Blazing Sevens, who he skipped the Derby with to get him up for the Preakness, and the horse ran the race of his life. No doubt that this horse is going to run a good race. Whether it's good enough to beat Muth, I don't know, but I think he's certainly one that you have to consider, and at 6-1, you're getting a nice price. So he gets a +7. All positives all the way around. Now we come to Imagination and the other Bob Baffert, and the only thing that's a little troubling to me is 4 seconds. You don't see that from a Bob Baffert too often. This one's been a little slow in developing. He's coming on late. And we take a look, and he's got the pedigree to handle this. Not a problem. Santa Anita Derby, I kind of think of Imagination the same way I thought of Stronghold. Nice horse, but who's he run against? And he did duel with Stronghold all the way down the stretch, and he ran a very solid Santa Anita Derby. But we thought Stronghold was going to run a big one in the Derby. Didn't think it would be fast enough, and that's kind of what happened. I thought he ran a very good race. He just wasn't fast enough. So really, we have to think that Imagination is going to need a very big move forward to be a win candidate. I think he can be competitive in this race, and the fact that there isn't a lot of pace should keep him in the race for a while, because he's going to be up near it. And he may end up on the lead. It's Bob Baffert. I think he'll have this horse ready to run a big one. I'm not worried about that. So all in all, you total it all up, he gets a +4. So we look at the field in totality, and we see Catching Freedom and Muth, as well as Tusk and Gold, are leading in the class department. A little surprised at Catching Freedom, but let's also remember he's had more races than Muth or Tusk and Gold, and that certainly would give him an edge. It's all the more impressive, really, the fact that Muth and Tusk and Gold are second and third because they haven't had as many races as the others. You see, everyone is in the positive. The real clunkers are Mugatu and Uncle Heavy, and if you had to pick horses that are a cut below, who maybe it's questionable whether they should be in this race, they would be the two. However, I do think both of them have the ability to move forward, but really, we just have to hope they get in the bottom at the Super with big odds. So really, it's Class has pretty much come out the way we expected it, and I think those are representative numbers of the way the horses will run in the Preakness. So that's Class, and so far in the first two parts of our analysis, it's pretty much been form-fitting. I think we know who the horses to beat are, and the ones that will be contenders, Major League in the Preakness, and we'll see if it stays true to form. Hope you are getting something out of this, and this will help you with your own analysis of the field, and I'll wish you the best of luck. As always, don't forget, we've got two more parts. We've got speed and pace, and then we will put it all together in one final installment, assessing all four corners of handicapping before we make our selections on who we like. So be on the lookout for that. Thanks again to all of you who have signed on recently. Really appreciate it, and look forward to having you in our community in the future. So that's it from here. Be on the lookout for more installments later this week. Lots more content coming up throughout the Triple Crown, and so stay right here for that. I'll talk to you soon, and until then, be well.